what we're doing gets applied in so many different situations with so many different people from so many different walks of life, and yet it still seems to prove itself valuable and effective and applicable under pressure. And any of you that know me at all, you know that that's my deal. I want things to be able to work in real time at full speed under pressure so that you can rely upon them just like you can rely upon things like the sun coming up and gravity. So we hope to further that kind of clarity and distillation of those common denominators around what all people go through from all walks of life in relationship to staying connected to one's self-worth. In our discussion of self-worth, we're going to talk about what from our applicable experience, right? So these definitions that we're coming up with the way that we're codifying these things is coming from the application of this in our work. So they're not just arbitrary definitions that we're going, oh, this sounds really cool because I think it's neat. Well, we both think that the definitions that we've arrived at are really cool and really compelling, but it's because we see them playing out in such consistent and predictable ways in all the work that we do, whether it's singularly together or in group settings. So to define more clearly what we're talking about in terms of like the workable, applicable definition of self-worth, we're going to talk about another component that many people discuss in a way that's almost interchangeable with the idea of self-worth, okay? And that's self-esteem. We hear those terms all the time, right? Oh, I have high self-esteem. Oh, my self-worth is low. Oh, my self-worth is feeling really good. Oh, that was a dent to my self-esteem, okay? And we use that terminology very, very interchangeably, I found. I'm not sure if, I'd love to hear if you've got similar experience, and Colleen echoes the same, right? People often talk about self-worth when they mean, or what they're trying to communicate is self-esteem. People talk about self-esteem in that similar manner about what they're trying to communicate is self-worth. Okay? As Colin just alluded to, there's a third component that we're going to talk about here that we don't talk about, I don't think, quite as much. Or at least Colin and I don't necessarily find people coming to us and speaking to us about this sort of third commodity that we're going to talk about as much as they might talk about issues around their self-worth or their self-esteem. Okay? And this one I think is really crucial because it kind of rounds out the dynamics that occur between self-worth and self-esteem, okay? When we're talking about them as if they are functional, alive entities, okay, that actually like work in the world. They're not just concepts, but when we're out there in the world going, how do I hang on to my self-worth when I feel like it's being detracted from? How do I continue to bolster and fortify and build my self-worth when I feel like I'm not getting encouragement or self-esteem from things outside of me? All those practical moments of real-time, real-life application are where this third idea, okay, that I'm going to introduce in a second, come into play. Okay, and that third idea is what we're going to call, and again, these are all just our definitions, okay, just to give us a consistent language to speak to each other and to people that we work with about and through. That third commodity is called self-determinism, okay, and start to kind of like fit together maybe or challenge ourselves to look at these three ideas, self-worth, self-esteem, and self-determinism, from a perspective that perhaps we haven't considered before, right? So what's beautiful and what's such a privilege about the work that we do is that not only do we get to explore ideas based upon our own experience, but we get this phenomenal cross-section of people from all walks of life who are wonderful, brave, and willing to come in and share their perspectives, right, of these different topics that we tackle. Okay, and this is one that self-worth, self-esteem, and all the ideas related to it that we're discussing tonight is one that comes up a lot for people, right? No matter what the scenario is, no matter what the situation that they're going through happens to be made up of, no matter what walk of life they're from, man, we decided to open up this discussion because we're like, gosh, that must be pretty important to people because like everybody in some way, shape, or form talks about it, right? Whether they are having a really positive and powerful relationship to it, or they're feeling like their relationship to it is a bit more out of their control at the moment. They feel like they're really, really doing well in the area of self-worth, or they feel like they're really, really struggling in the areas of self-esteem. It's such a common denominator to human experience that we learn more from you guys than we ever are proposed to teach you. And that's part of what we want to share tonight, is all that learning, all that ability to go, wow, we get this great cross-section of information from all these fantastic, really courageous people, and boy, are we learning a lot. We want to share that with everyone, right? Simply because we get the opportunity to have all those conversations in maybe a very specific way that if you aren't doing the kind of work we're doing, you're not going to get as easily or as consistently, right?
And then I think the definitions next and how they all interplay.
Mm-hmm.
But my 30-second thing before that is part of the reason that this matters so much to me is, you see people who say, well, stress is at the core of so many problems and so many issues. And that's not wrong. It certainly is an issue. But when you look at this interplay of these three definitions, this is one of the places where I think very few of us, if any of us, have been taught how to differentiate between these, how to utilize these. And as a result, there are so many people stumbling along using one in place of the other and really suffering for it, and suffering unnecessarily. And I'm becoming much less of a fan of suffering these days. So, definitions.
Awesome. And again, remember, these definitions are for the purposes of practical application and discussion, right? And they're the ones that we have sort of distilled things down to into the most sort of simple form, because simplicity is where we get the best feedback when the rubber meets the road, right? In other words, when we're out there actually in dynamic situations in life in real time, experiencing and working through any obstacles or issues that come up from these things that we're calling self-worth, self-esteem, and self-determinism. Okay, so I want you to picture a pyramid, okay? And that's me being super artistic and fancy, drawing a pyramid shape. Hold your applause. So when we're talking about how these things work together, we're going to put self-worth at the base of the pyramid, okay? It's at the base. It's the one that's closest to the real world. It's the one that's the most engaged with real-time, real-life dynamic situations that human beings live through on a daily basis. Okay, if you look at the topology of a pyramid, it's also the widest, right? It's the base. Okay, and we're putting it there for a purpose. So we're going to describe self-worth first of all as a sort of a way of being, and then second as the process that goes with it. So as a way of being, self-worth is your own personal perception of your own value, right? So it's your perception of your value. That's what we're going to define self-worth as. And I know that includes some of what we've already talked about. I know that sounds like we're kind of excluding some of what we've already talked about, but it's not because there's a right or wrong about that. We're just going to identify the language and codify it consistently so that we all know that we're talking about the same thing when we talk about that particular thing. That's the purpose of it. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's at the base. As a way of being, it is your perception of your own value, right? In other words, how you feel about yourself. Okay, in terms of its definition, in terms of the way of being. In terms of its process, okay, we're going to call that process internal, right? So self-worth is has an internal process to it. And it's okay, even if you've been thinking of it the other way, it doesn't matter, because we're not saying one's right and one's wrong. We're just offering you a codified new possibility for perspective to categorize, prioritize, and assess these things that we're talking about tonight. Okay, just to give you a new way to think about it. And in fact, in many of the instances that we offer people sort of a codified definition of something, one of the things that makes Colleen and I happiest is when you take that, try it on, and then reject it. It's awesome, because it means you are now thinking about something that resonates for you more than that definition. So feel no compunction in going, I don't agree with that. All we're asking you to do right now is suspend your disbelief and kind of keep playing along like you have been so beautifully. Okay. The next layer of that pyramid, right? So we've got that base of self-worth at the bottom. The next layer of that pyramid is self-esteem, right? So just like in the shape of that triangle, it's a little bit smaller, right, in terms of its actual size and shape, but it sits on top of self-worth, okay? And it occupies its position in the pyramid there. Okay? We're going to define that in terms of its way of being as your perception, okay, of other people's perception of your value, right? So self-worth is your perception of your value, okay? Self-esteem as a way of being is your perception of how other people perceive your value, okay? Its process, just to recap, self-worth is an internal process, okay? We're going to describe self-esteem as what we call a reciprocal process, right? So it has, in other words, two terminals. We could call them internal and external. Okay? But to really codify it into simplicity, we're going to call it reciprocal. There's a point of it that emanates from within you, and there's a point of it that emanates from outside of you, right? Whereas right now we're just defining self-worth as being that which emanates from you internally. It's determined by you. Okay? Again, more than happy if you reject these ideas, but because that means that you're thinking about it, which is awesome, because that's all we want you to do. So clear so far? Everybody following me along okay so far? Super cool. Thank you very much. Cool. So now when we come to the top of the pyramid, okay, so we've got, again, we're picturing that shape, right? We've got self-worth at the bottom. We've got self-esteem layered on top of that, right? And at the top of the triangle, almost in its own little triangle, which is kind of by design, which we'll get into as we go along, is self-determinism. Okay? And it sits on top of self-worth, self-esteem, and self-worth. Self-determinism, okay, we can describe in terms of our way of being as choices determined by my own assessment. Okay, so choices determined by your own assessment. Because that's the other thing that determination means, right? We always think about determination as courage and resilience, which it is absolutely awesome in terms of its expression as a noun, as a thing, right? But determination is also the thing that we use to describe the function of choosing. So what I mean by that is we can say, well, it's by my determination that I decided that I wanted water and not tea. It's by my determination that I decided to put on my running shoes instead of my rain boots today, even though it's pouring rain outside. Right? So we can make a determination about something, which isn't sort of always the way that we often think about that concept, right? We usually think of it more in terms of like we talked about, which is beautiful and true. This is about, pushing through and being tough and being strong and being resilient. But determination is also the act of choosing and prioritizing, right? I'm making a determination about something as to its value, as to its priority. Okay? So that's what we're going to describe it in terms of it as a way of being. Right? It's about our own recognition to make a choice and determine something for ourselves. Okay? We're talking about it in terms of its energy and its process. We're going to describe it as being an expressive process. So self-worth is internal. Self-esteem is reciprocal. Okay? And self-determinism is expressive in terms of how it actually shows up in the world. In other words, we make a choice and then we express that choice by having action that follows up on it. Really simple, right? Oh, I wanted water instead of tea. Well, how do I know and how do I show people that I wanted water instead of tea? Well, then when I have a glass of water and a glass of tea in front of me, I drink the water, right?
Question 1, can we have an example? Question 2,
Sure.
Is it possible to have high or moderate self-worth but low self-esteem? If so, does one affect the other? Dana's very sad about those questions.
Making me dance. Right. So, and I'm super excited to give you an example. And I'm so excited to see, and this started from the moment we opened this conversation. All of you started to like make these connections, to start to like see these patterns and put things together yourself. Because we may be using language in a way that you haven't heard before or haven't considered before. But what's beautiful about this is that we're not teaching you anything new. What we're doing is challenging you to remind you of what you already know about this. Okay? And that's why, even though you might go, what's Dana talking about? Like, huh? Yet you're still able to put connections together and start thinking about it in a way that goes, okay, well, that could mean this. Or maybe does that mean that? Or does it not mean either of those? Okay? And what we're doing is we're building up clarity around our own interpretation of these ideas by asking ourselves some questions and being brave enough to answer them honestly, right? Well, no, here's what I think. Oh, no, I don't really know. I haven't really thought about that, right? Every one of those actions is going to bring new information to light that's going to clarify for you more and more and more what it is that you connect and resonate with in this discussion. So I'm super happy to give an example. I want to be really specific about what kind of example you would like. Are we just talking about how these? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Awesome. I'd rather hear your question.
Like in totality. So I have a firm grasp on, the bottom 2 points of the pyramid. But when you're explaining self-determinism, I guess I want to hear it differently or hear an example of that specific piece.
Cool. So thank you for that clarity. That's awesome. And we're kind of headed in that direction. And I'm going to say it hopefully in a way that's really, really clear. Okay. So what we're throwing out to you and what we're challenging you with right now is to consider the possibility that you have more control over your experience of self-worth than you think. Okay. What I'm postulating and what we're throwing out to you, again, from just all these thousands of hours of experience that we have in these conversations with people, is that, and we'll define it as we go, but there's a direct correlation between one's own experience of self-worth, right? How much of your self-worth you feel on a regular basis, okay? And your relationship to self-determinism. Okay? And that relationship is this. The more you feel like you are self-determined about the choices and actions you take in life, the higher your self-worth is. And that's sort of the simplest and most direct kind of example I can give you. So in other words, if I'm sitting down with Colleen and we're at a restaurant and the waiter comes up and says, oh, can I get you something to drink? And I see that Colleen's drinking tea and I really want water, I'm going to feel better about myself if I actually speak up and say, you know what? Yeah, no, I actually I'd really rather have water. Thank you. What I'm postulating is that enhances, builds, and fortifies your self-worth. We can talk about how, but that's really the fundamental postulate that we're putting forward here. Okay, and yes, with something as seemingly insignificant as, well, I actually had water and said I wanted water when I actually wanted water, as opposed to just having tea because Col was having tea and I didn't want the waiter to have to go back and get me a glass of water when he had the teapot in his hand. Right? Even small examples like that, where you are self-determined, right? Where you are in your awareness of your right and your ability to determine your choice in the following action, build your self-worth. Not only does it build your self-worth, it makes you feel in present time alive and connected to your sense of self-worth.
Yes.
Yes.
And part of that also, and then actually we want to get back to that question about self-worth and self-esteem.
Oh, that's coming too.
Yeah. But part of that is the interaction between self-determinism and self-esteem. Because so much of us in that so much of what we do in that self-esteem process, in our interactions with the outside world, in the choices that we make, not only for ourselves, but when we step up for what we stand up for, when we step up for other people, based on our moral compass, based on our integrity, the clearer we are about what those three things do and what they are and what they're not, the easier it is for us to make self-determined choices. And so for those of you who were brought up in an incredibly well-resourced household with parents who didn't have any of their own stuff going on, and they had tons of time for you, and they were never stressed in their own childhood, and they had time to go through all of their own stuff and all of their own crap, and everything that they did was just beautiful and blissful and perfect, they probably taught you these things. For the rest of the world, where your parents were just doing their best to get by and get through, they didn't necessarily give you this space to encourage that sense of self-worth, to analyze the sense of self-esteem, to choose self-determinism for you, or in those acts with the outside world as well. So this is not only about what you do for yourself, it's what you do when you stand for others. High or moderate self-worth, but low self-esteem.
Beautiful. So again, Carl just flooded my brain with all kinds of really cool ideas. But fundamentally, what we're describing here is the mechanism by which you take command of your self-worth. And I'll kind of reverse engineer it again in a way, and then we'll fill in the examples as we go. Who here has ever had any challenges or problems with being and feeling like they're a people pleaser? If I had like 4 arms, I'd put them all up, right? And to use the language that we've built so far, getting caught in that trap of being a people pleaser, we would describe as exalting the value of your self-esteem over the value of your self-worth. In other words, being more motivated by your perception of how other people perceive your value than by the perception of how you perceive your value.
Which is what so many of us were taught.
Oh, we were all trained to do that, right? On some level.
Can you repeat that last? Do you mind repeating that last sentence? I need to turn that for a second.
Yeah, which one specifically? Just so I don't repeat.
Just the very last one. It was like I got halfway through it and I was like, oh my God. And then I think I missed the last half of it.
Right. So, and tell me if I'm not getting this right. But basically I was saying that we've all been trained, okay, to be agreeable, essentially. We've all been trained that we're going to get along best in life if we are willing to consistently exalt our pursuit of self-esteem over our pursuit of self-worth. So we're going to get along better in society. People are going to like us better if what we use as our North Star, if what we use as our guiding principle is the idea that other people's perception of our value is more important than our own perception of our value. So if we make choices, right, if we're talking about choices of self-worth being self-determined, we could say, just for the sake of discussion, that choices of self-esteem can oftentimes be other-determined. In other words, they're determined by the people around us more than they are determined by us. But what's tricky about that, and which is part of why we conflate self-esteem and self-worth all the time, right? And we use those terms interchangeably, is because we know that on some level, even when we choose to value the perception of other people's value more than our own, that on some level, we're actually still choosing that too, right? In other words, we're saying, oh, well, yeah, I don't want tea. He only has a teapot. Carl's having tea. Everybody else at the table's having tea. I don't want him to have to go back and get me water. So I don't want anybody to think I'm kind of a jerk and being demanding. I'll just have tea, right? That's a perfect example of putting my self-esteem in the way that we're describing it, right, in priority of importance over my self-worth. Because I want to make sure that the people around me are pleased. with my behavior and my choice. How am I going to do that most easily? By being agreeable, right, to the group. The group's going this way. I'm not going to be contrary, right?
You're always contrary.
It's funny because it's true.
It works for me. So question 1, so is self-determinism related to autonomy? And number 2, so how do we stop doing that?
Absolutely. Self-determinism is absolutely related to autonomy. Okay? And this is going to sound almost overly simplistic. And not because it's so easy, okay, but because it is simple. The mechanism of it is quite simple. Okay? We stop overcoming that by employing courage. Or not stop overcoming. We start overcoming that by employing courage, right? And I don't mean necessarily big C, capital O-U-R-A-G-E, rush into the burning building headlong to save people's lives kind of courage. I'm talking about little c, everyday, applicable courage, right? That inspires us to tell the truth when it would be easier to just be agreeable. And I don't mean, again, even capital T, universal truth of life truth. I'm talking about truth in terms of authenticity. My own personal, autonomous authenticity. My own personal desire that says, I would much rather have water than tea. Now, does it really matter if at the end of the day I choose water over tea in that hypothetical scenario we're talking about? It doesn't really, actually, in terms of the action itself. Right? But what we're talking about is what drives the action. Right? What we're talking about is the why behind the action. So I could be self-determined in a very self-worth enhancing manner in this same example by simply saying, oh, great, yeah, I'll have tea. Right? But if I'm saying that because I know that it feels highly valuable to me to be really respectful to this super busy waiter that's having to cover 10 tables on his or her own, and really respectful to my peers at the table who've already been waiting really patiently to get any kind of service, and I don't want to add 3 minutes to this person have to run back, grab water, bring it out for me, then I could be as self-worth driven and self-determined in my choice internally of saying, actually, I really feel like water, but tea will be good. And just simply say to the person, great, tea will be fantastic, thank you. Right? Why could that work that way in that instance? Because again, self-worth is an internal process, right? It's me determining the priority of my action and my value based upon my feeling of connection to what makes me feel most valuable to myself. In that instance, I might say, oh, you know what? I feel really good about myself, that I'm being respectful and polite and aware of how my actions can affect other people around me. I feel really good about myself when I'm considerate of other people's experience and feeling. Right? But that is the very action that requires a little bit of courage, because it requires a little bit of courage to take the little time that it takes to assess oneself like that in that moment, and then act honestly, act authentically. That's why it builds my self-esteem. That's why it gives me direct experience of my self-worth.
3 comments, 1 question.
Sure.
Comments, and sometimes when you advocate for yourself and focus on self-worth, it's received as making conflict or being selfish.
Again, you got me dancing. That was the exact next thing we were going to talk about.
We also have to be aware that
yes,
people probably have places to be.
Absolutely.
Courage to tell our truth is the next one, and
again,
then Isa has her hand up.
For sure. You guys are putting this together so beautifully, right? Because in all of that hopefully inspiring and useful rhetoric that I just shared with you, we also have to recognize that there's the possibility for the other to occur, right? But that's why it has to be a self-determined choice. What's that other possibility? Sometimes in order to secure your connection and your experience of your self-worth as we're describing it, of how you feel about yourself inside as determined by you. Right? You got to employ some courage. Why? Because you run the risk of, in the reach for that self-worth, temporarily, maybe permanently, depending upon the level of risk in that reach, of losing some self-esteem. In other words, you run the risk of potentially not pleasing people by automatically being agreeable with what it is that they've projected to you that they want. You run the risk of them potentially looking at you through eyes that perceive you with less value than you had before you were disagreeable and deployed some courage on your own behalf to speak up authentically. That's the real rub, right? That's the real challenge. That's the real question. Because just like that little example around the water and the tea is just as valuable in building your own connection and experience directly of your self-worth. In other words, you feel how valuable you are because it takes courage and value to tell the truth. And we all inherently know it. We also run the risk of, oh man, every time I don't do that, I might experience the esteem of others around me, but I'm also setting myself up to be prone to looking in the mirror and going, yeah, man, I should have spoken up, but I wanted water, damn. Right? And in those small incremental ways, because each one of those things on their own doesn't amount to much necessarily, but when we're talking about ways of being, what we're talking about are persistent beliefs. And when we're talking about persistent beliefs, we're talking about the habits of expression. In other words, if we concede just because it's easier and easier to be agreeable and easier to be polite more times than we don't, then after the 10th time, the 100th time, the 1000th time of that, we're going to then step back and wonder where our self-worth has disappeared to. So that's the sort of the rub of the whole discussion, right? How do I navigate that? How do I manage that? How do I actually execute that in real time, in real life, at full speed? And why would I want to? And what's the value of it? Those are all the questions that we're posing tonight.
This is information we want people to have. And I know a lot of you, are here, you have kids, you have people who you teach or people who you interact with, and this information, as it gets disseminated, this doesn't just go to you, right? It goes to you, and then through you it goes out into the world, and it changes people. So that's part of why we do this and why we love doing this. We're also doing more classes coming up soon, and if you want information on the classes, definitely give us a shout. We've got some stuff online at courses.crimsondarkhealing.com. You can check those out.
Thanks for participating tonight, everyone. And if I may be so bold as to applaud your courage in doing so, right? It takes courage to open oneself up to new information, even if that information is challenging, and especially if it's contrary. So, great practice of your courage tonight. Keep it up, carry it forward, put it first and foremost in everything you do. And thanks again for your participation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.